Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor.
The world is still getting more exciting, and but what's amazing in this past week, I think, is that um, things have happened both that show the problems with globalization and perhaps that it's not working as fast as we thought it was, and also other things which show it's working faster than we really were prepared for.
Hmm.
And the first thing that I think we have to mention, even though we can't say very much about it, is this plane that went lost. But that a plane that size, that well um, connected to um, everything that is concerned with air traffic, could disappear
Hmm.
is really remarkable at this stage of globalization.
Well, it's very remarkable, and aside from the physical aspects of the disappearance and the search and the telemetry supposedly being emitted from the Rolls-Royce engines, and the possibility, which apparently has now been verified by the American intelligence services, that the plane did in fact fly for 4 more hours or 2,000 plus more miles after it lost radar contact. Aside from all that, there was an article in either the Times today or the Wall Street Journal talking about the hundreds, if not thousands, of journalists who have descended upon Kuala Lumpur and are really shaking things up in what is really ordinarily a very paternalistic government that has essentially been in power since the British gave independence to Malaysia some 60 years ago. And there was apparently a press conference 2 days ago in which several hundred international journalists, I mean, presumably ranging from like the Wolf Blitzer types down to, God knows who, were in a room with the transport minister who was used to having his instructions carried out to the letter. And these people just descended upon him, just tearing apart his answers with the inconsistencies and pointing them out. And the Malaysian opposition is ecstatic, as quoted in the article, saying, "Good, now everybody finally knows what we've been facing here." I found that very interesting. That even in a country that is so tightly wound as Malaysia, where I remember when President Clinton visited it several years ago, there were instructions given to the traveling press and the White House party about the draconian criminal laws that they have in place, and warning them that they'd be on their own if they stepped out of bounds of the official entourage and bubble. I find it amazing that an event such as the disappearance of this plane can bring the sunlight of the international press in and embarrass the heck out of the government at this point, so it makes front page stories 7,000 miles away.
No, it really is amazing, and that's a very good example, actually, of what is happening these days. Anything that will disturb the normal way of doing things, disrupts normal procedures, opens up things for a new boost in the direction of globalization. And Malaysia has managed to keep itself secluded
Mm.
ever since independence. And everybody knows that there are really serious political problems there, but nobody's been able to break through the straitjacket of post what should we call it, neo-colonial administration that has been in place, and this may do it.
Well, this certainly will open a crack, that's for sure.
But if it does, it's going to have repercussions in the area because Malaysia is very closely associated in geopolitical, economic ways with all the other countries of Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
And it won't hurt Indonesia, but it's going to make a difference to the other um, mainland Southeast Asian
Hmm.
nations, I think.
I suspect it will. I
So
suspect it will.
it's going to be very interesting to watch it.
Well,
Uh,
it's going to be also very interesting to find out what happened to the plane. I mean, most likely, as we were discussing beforehand, most likely, unfortunately, the plane probably did go down somewhere and is lost. But with the new information that's now arisen, the possibility that it was commandeered and taken somewhere can't be discounted.
But if it really did fly for another 4 hours, presumably somebody knew what they were doing, and it's possible that it could have landed somewhere.
Yes, yes, yes. It's a big mystery. I mean, it's really going to be something. So
Because one would have thought that if it was planned, somebody would want some publicity.
we were discussing that here earlier. You would think that if it had been flown to say Pyongyang or someplace in eastern Afghanistan, that somebody would be trumpeting this by now.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who
Well,
knows?
maybe we'll know by next week.
Maybe we will. I hope we do. At least for the families of the people who are on the plane, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
In the meantime, we've got Venezuela, Crimea, Turkey.
Well, there was another interesting story today. I had known this, of course, but Angela Merkel, of course, grew up in Dresden, and President Putin, who was only 2 years older than Merkel, had served in the KGB in Dresden. And Angela Merkel speaks Russian fluently, and Putin speaks German slightly less than fluently. And she warned him in no uncertain terms this morning in a speech to the Bundestag that Russia is going to face severe economic consequences if they do not cease and desist in the Crimea. And apparently, after her most recent phone call with Putin, presumably conducted in Russian, she spoke to President Obama later in the day and said that she thinks Putin is living in an alternative universe.
Well, did you see the Economist's? The Economist has him on the cover,
Okay, I did not.
dressed as a ballet dancer on ice skates.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I mean, he's, as you mentioned in the last discussion, he's doing things the old way. And
But but you know when the first time was that Russia invaded Crimea?
when?
I'm not sure of the actual date, but it was in the middle of the 19th century.
Okay.
The Crimean War. It started the Crimean War.
That's the Florence Nightingale War?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it was trying to hold on to the Ottoman Empire
Mm-hmm.
and stop the British
Mm-hmm.
taking it over. So there's a big historical background to this, which and what amazes me is that no journalist so far that I've seen has gone to the trouble of explaining
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in Russian minds,
Mm-hmm.
because it has a completely different meaning in Russia from the meaning it has here. And I would have thought that somebody in some foreign office would have alerted some foreign leader to,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they haven't. Maybe neither Angela Merkel or David Cameron or Barack Obama want to know about it.
Well, let me ask you a question. From the perspective of a careful reader of the Western newspapers, the situation is as follows: the independent Ukrainians and the happy Crimeans, who have rebuilt their country from years of domination by the former Soviet Union, have essentially been threatened now to the point where they stand a chance of losing the Crimea. That's the point of view that most of the West has. What is the Russian point of view, in your opinion?
Well, the Russian point of view is that Russia began in Kiev,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no real reason why Ukraine should be a separate country.
Mm-hmm.
The reason it's a separate country is essentially an accident that has to do with Stalin wanting as many seats in the United Nations as possible. And Ukraine has only been an independent country since 1991.
Mm-hmm.
It was never independent of Russia before that. It was, yes, there was a lot of back and forth between Russia and Poland over parts of Ukraine, and the current borders of Ukraine are very modern. So I mean, I think that even though I'm certainly not going to make an argument for the Russian political system, I think that the way the Russians think of their own identity gives them a lot of motivation for holding on to Ukraine within their own zone of influence.
Agreed.
And after all, the I don't know what the overall percentage is of people in within the boundaries of Ukraine as it was defined as late as 1954, when Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine for no very good reason, I don't think. But it's certainly it must be at least 20% of people who would prefer to be part of Russia than separated from Russia. Although, of course, one doesn't really know, because there may be people who want to be part of Russia but don't want to be part of Putin's Russia.
Right, right, right.
I mean, there's all sorts of other complicating factors.
Well, this could be a potential tinderbox here, because I mean the West is seemingly determined to not let this stand. To use George Bush Sr.'s famous phrase, "This will not stand" with Saddam and Kuwait. But Obama seems to have signed on to everything that the hardest of hardliners, such as Merkel and Cameron, are advocating.
Well, I think Obama is very happy that Merkel is being so active about it, because
Yes.
I don't think he wants to um, become the leader of any action against Russia. So it suits him very well.
If they do implement economic sanctions, such as they've done against Iran or Cuba or North Korea, obviously it takes a long time for those to be implemented and approved and then put into place and then to have effect. I mean, how far down this road do you think we'll have to go until the oligarchs in Russia begin to see their pocketbooks affected to the point where they go see Putin and say, "Wait a minute, this is not working."
I think that they're probably well enough connected not to worry too much. And
Okay.
I think that economic sanctions uh, are a bad policy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they achieve anything positive in the long run at all. It's the favorite modern weapon for if you don't want to actually send troops in, as economic sanctions. But
Mm-hmm.
the last thing we want to do is to inhibit growth,
Right.
because growth is always in our favor.
It is. It is. It is.
Growth makes people more interested in change.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if they're interested in change, they're interested in our sort of change, not
Mm-hmm.
Putin's type of change.
Mm-hmm.
So it's against our interests to launch sanctions.
What would you do if you were in the White House? I mean, it's an awful question, but right.
Maybe I'd better get ready for that. Yes.
Well, no, but I mean, it is would we can't, or can we? Can we just stand back and say this is almost an intra-Russian problem? Let them handle it. Because if we do that, then we're almost applying that same logic to, for example, Syria or Afghanistan or.
I think. Well, of course, we have the problem with we have several problems with Putin, especially Syria, but also with almost everything else
Mhm.
that's an international affair. But I would say that the best policy, and what I would do if I had any influence at all, what I would argue for is more talking.
Mhm.
The more people are put in a situation where they have to talk about things, the more new things come out. If you have the same people talking all the time, then they say the same things all the time.
Right. Right.
But as long as you can keep reshuffling them,
Mhm.
the what gets said begins to change. New things come up. There are new associations, and of course, the situation on the ground is always changing.
It's almost like as if it's a microcosm of globalization itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
think it is.
Interesting.
Um, the I don't think anybody's quite ready for what's going on in Latin America.
No. No. No.
Um,
No,
I,
and the only people I think who are really keeping an eye on that, of course, are the Cubans because they fear the potential cutoff of their oil.
But
They're
the situation in several parts of Latin America is deteriorating. I think it's Chile, in Argentina
mhm.
at one end, and Venezuela at the other end are probably the two worst cases. But there are several, and I'm not sure whether that has to do with the rising awareness of ordinary people or not, because I don't know enough about Latin America.
Well, I think the situation in Latin America is such that there is such a large percentage of people who are disenfranchised, the poor, the native population, and the people who are really running the countries and have been running the countries for hundreds and hundreds of years. Um, and I think I mean, it's almost a situation that's ripe for the kinds of things that we saw, for example, during the Arab Spring and that we've seen in other places. I don't quite know what the degree of penetration of information is into the hinterlands down there, but I'm always very surprised when a million plus people can be mobilized in large cities down there to demonstrate over a 10-cent increase in a bus fare. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, not to mention protesting over the relative sophistication of an argument saying you are spending all this money on soccer stadiums in advance of the World Cup and not on hospitals. I mean, that's also relatively
Yeah.
sophisticated.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that Latin America is going to continue to take over more and more of our news, our front pages.
Hmm.
But I think probably what we should finish up talking about today is Turkey and its connection with everything else in the Middle East, given that Sisi, it looks more and more like becoming president. And so everything is becoming more and more polarized in Egypt, and it's difficult to tell whether that's going to make it possible for it to be quiet for a while, or whether it's going to lead to another crisis.
Hmm. Do you think that the military will intervene finally in Turkey again?
I'm not sure they're capable of it anymore.
Oh, because they've been so compromised by
Yeah,
Erdogan.
yeah.
Ah.
Um, so it's quite possible that in Turkey there will really be a change of style of government,
Hmm.
because the current Erdogan is losing all his credibility.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, what happens in Syria is going to affect what he's doing, and that's completely unpredictable at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, the chemical weapons are still part of the main negotiation. Um, the but Obama seems to be absolutely determined to reach the agreement with Iran, and Iran seems to be absolutely determined to make sure it happens.
Hmm.
So the big question is it going to happen before the end of Obama's term or not? That is I mean, not the agreement has to happen before the end of Obama's term, but is it going to lead to results before the end of Obama's term? Because if it is, I think that's going to start really significant changes for the next presidential term in this country.
No, I agree with you, and it's interesting because John Kerry has also been spending a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, trying to reassure them. Um, so, I mean, it's almost as if they're lining the dominoes up, saying we're going to make a move on this. You're going to have to be ready. We're still committed to you. We're not going anywhere. Keep in mind, we sent 500,000 people here a generation ago to preserve your country against Iraq. And we'll do the same if needed, but we're going to have to start speaking on a friendly basis with these other people who are your mortal enemies. It's a very
But
strange situation.
they have their own problems, internal domestic problems, which America can't help them with.
Oh, in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I
so,
mean,
and they may even be becoming more preoccupied with their own problems than worried about what's going on outside.
my personal view is that the problems in Saudi Arabia are intractable and irresolvable. That's my view, and I just don't think that they're going to. I don't think that regime will survive.
Well, I think that what you're saying about Saudi Arabia is true for all the countries in the Middle East as they're currently constituted.
Hmm.
And it's just going to hit one after another, and we don't know in what order yet. And I suspect that Iran is going to come off better than any of the others.
Well, you've made that observation before about the democracy in Iran actually being relatively healthy in comparison to the other democracies in the region.
It's an urban society,
Yeah.
and it has an economy, and it has an identity that nobody quarrels about.
Hmm.
I mean, there are certainly minorities who might not want to be part of Iran,
Hmm.
but a good 80% of the population, unlike what is the case in every other country
Yeah.
in the region, know who they are.
It's a very good observation. And I could even say that a couple of times in the past, you've reminded me that the American secession attempts down in Texas with the Tea Party. So that could translate over here too. Who knows? So, all right. Well, thank you, Professor. I look forward to speaking with you next week.
Which will be the equinox.
Oh, that's right. It will be. Maybe it'll finally be warm. All right. Thank you.
Fine.
Bye.